Okay, we have some experts up here on non-cash gift programs. They've graciously agreed to share some stories and answer questions. Well, let's just first go down and introduce ourselves and our organization, and then we'll start in with more detailed information. Just an introduction.
Is this on? Everybody can hear me? Very good. My name is Stephanie Kasperzak. I'm the Executive Director of the Monroe County Opportunity Program, and we're a community action agency that serves Monroe County.
Hi, I'm Susan Goodell. I'm President and CEO of Forgotten Harvest. We're a large food rescue operation serving Metro Detroit.
My name's Chet Decker. I'm Executive Director of Hope Center in Macomb, Client Choice Pantry, and one-stop shop for human services in Macomb County.
My name is Ryan Hertz. I'm the Executive Director of South Oakland Shelter. We're an emergency homeless shelter and homeless service provider.
Good afternoon, Ann Kalis. I'm the CEO at Starfish Family Services in Inkster. We're a family service agency largely serving Western Wayne County with a focus on children and very young children.
Good afternoon. My name is Faye Askew King, and I'm the Executive Director of SOS Community Services in Ypsilanti, Michigan. We provide a wide range of services for at-risk and homeless families in Washtenaw County. We have a housing crisis program that does eviction prevention. We have homeless children's services and homeless family service.
Okay, we'd like you to give a kind of a big overview of your non-cash gifts program in terms of whatever details you'd like to share. Number of non-cash gifts, how you got started, percentage of your budget, that kind of thing. So whoever would like to go first.
Well, I can start by saying your question assumes a lot more organization than maybe some of us have.
Oh.
In the sense that, you know, we're all trying to do so many things, and we do the best job we can at a variety of whether it's in development or offering our programs and services. I guess at Starfish, I would say we don't have a fully developed non-cash program, although it's in the works, and without having a fully fleshed program because our priorities are in other places, by being strategic in how we think about what we need and how we go about finding those things, I think has a tremendous value to our organization. So I think because many of us have such limited human capacity to do all the things we want to do, these kinds of donations can really get you off focus and off mission, because people are always trying to give you something that, I mean, they care about the mission and they're trying to be helpful, but because we don't always have the capacity to process these things, they can become things sitting in hallways that don't have a role and just never get to where they're supposed to be.
So in those cases, do you say no?
We do. We're getting more disciplined about that. And we are very focused because our population that we serve are young families with young children, and we have large federal grants that we need in kind for just from a business model standpoint. So we're very targeted now in what we look for in terms of diapers and formula and just space that we can use for in kind in our leases. So I'm just trying to frame that I think the audience has probably gotten a lot of very sophisticated information today, and you know, it's starting to translate into our organization, but we're at the early stages. And
quick question, do you have a gift acceptance policy
Yes, we
that
do.
indicates who has authority to say no to a gift and under what
Yes.
circumstances?
Yes, so in the last year we have made a lot of progress. Our board approved actually about a month ago our gift acceptance policy, and even more tactically within our staff now, we have guidelines about what we'll accept and not accept. We are accepting a ton of clothing because, again, people are trying to be helpful, but our space is limited, and so we were drowning in clothing. So we're just being very strategic and thoughtful so that we don't get off what our priorities are to best serve the families in our care.
Good, thank you. Who's next?
I'll go next. We're a community action agency, so we do a number of things from housing and weatherization, but we also operate the countywide food bank. So I think from our perspective, again, we're not as sophisticated to know the percentage of budget that represents. However, the two biggest programs where we do in-kind non-cash gifts is through our food bank and through our homeless programs. And so through those, it is inevitable that through those non-cash donations that something else will come of it, whether it be a new partnership or cash donations that come in as a result. So it's a very important and critical part of our organization.
Good.
At Forgotten Harvest, in-kind gifts are a big part of what we do. Part of that is because food is such an integral part of our mission, but also there are a lot of other items that we actively look for as well. To give you an idea of the scope of this, our cash budget last fiscal year that ended June 30th was $5.5 million. When you include in all of the in-kind, which of course does include food, it's $45 million. So included in that number are things like food, furniture, trucks, boxes, landscaping, you name it. It is something that we actively look for, and that doesn't mean that we accept things that are not appropriate, so we'll often turn down used computers, for example, that would no longer function with our system because of age or whatever, but we actively look for items that would be helpful in achieving our mission.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, one of the challenges that we have as an organization is that we're in 4 different sites, and we historically have used a lot of volunteers to do kind of the work. We have volunteer tutors, we have volunteers to help us distribute food, and every year, because we also serve homeless families, we've always had an adopt a family program. And we always have people who donate food to our food pantry. And so we decided we have got to be more strategic around how we handle and really move non-cash gift givers to donors. And so we've tried to be much more strategic around that and look at projects and things that we need done for our organization that will give us what I'm going to say, more professional volunteers who have a higher capacity to give, because we have a crisis center, we get a lot of student volunteers, and they're always transient folks and don't really always grow and emerge as donors. So an example of what we've started doing is about 3 years ago, we needed a cooler for our food pantry because we were adding another day and we needed to have the capacity to store food longer. So our development director went out to, there's a business builders association in Washington County, and pled our case, and so they decided that they would do a special drive. They raised money, they bought the cooler, they installed the cooler, we took pictures of the cooler, we put it in our newsletter, and then we had a strategy to we totally thanked them. They were one of our donors of the year. And then we got all of their information and added it to our donor software bank. And then we targeted our appeal letters to those volunteers because they indicated they had a focus in food. So whenever we did an appeal or a newsletter or our blog that had something about food and the food program, we would send it to them as a way to kind of move those kind of non-cash opportunities into donors.
Good, good.
For those of you who aren't familiar with South Oakland Shelter, our program's essentially, it's entirely based on in-kind giving. We were founded by congregations in Oakland County who initially started a rotating shelter system in the congregations. Eventually, this became a year-round system, and eventually, within the first few years of its existence, incorporated as a separate nonprofit entity to coordinate the activities between the congregations. So our flagship program is our emergency shelter program, and that's essentially provided in kind with a small amount of overhead to coordinate that activity. So we aren't very sophisticated when it comes to non-cash gifts yet outside of that system, but that system itself brings in, last year brought in roughly $1.6 million in-kind support through the congregation members volunteering. So we have roughly 6,000 to 8,000 volunteers a year that interact with our program through the congregations. Our cash budget for the same time period was just under $1 million. But the majority of that was in programs outside of the emergency shelter. So the emergency shelter itself is almost entirely funded by in-kind support from congregations. So it's an interesting model. One of the things that we've done on occasion to try to address the issue of transforming non-cash gifts into cash donations is I've noticed we'll receive gifts from folks that are purchased supplies and items, which is kind of an interesting way of restricting a gift. Instead of actually making the gift and saying, I'd like this to be for food, going out and purchasing new food and bringing it to us. Or clothing would be another example of that. And one of the things that I do is try to make sure to communicate on a regular basis that we have storage limitations, that different times a year we need different things, and that it's a lot more helpful to us to have that in a financial, liquid cash position versus in boxes of underwear or whatever the case may be. So that's been a helpful message, but it still happens. And certainly we receive a lot of donations that are used clothing and things like that, and we're very grateful for those donations, and those are used. We essentially store the majority of them and then have sort of a seasonal clothing closet that we use for our clients. And if we have overflow, we donate it to another organization. So.
Well, our experience is a little different. We're brand new. Our organization started in 2006, but Hope Center only began in June of last year. So we've only been in operation for 15 months. Last year, our cash budget that we had was about $252,000. But when you add the in-kind gift, we're over $1,080,000, due in large part to our food pantry, which was about $750,000 of that $1 million was in gifts in kind for food for the food pantry. One other thing that we've done that's a little different than some of the other ones, we have a large warehouse associated with our building. So we've been able to take in-kind donations and sell them and take the money and put it back into the operation of the pantry. What happened, and the economy, is several businesses last year were donating as they either relocated, went out of business, or downsized, gave us large amounts of office equipment. We took the office equipment, put it on Craigslist, sold it, and used it to operate the pantry. The last example was we took a 77,000 square foot office complex. 77,000 square. That's a big place. They gave us all the office furniture. Our challenge was to store it until we could sell it. This year we've realized the benefit of the sale because it was right at the end of the year last year. But last year we converted non-cash gifts to $38,000 worth of cash donations. This year we're on track to have almost $100,000 converted from non-cash gifts to cash to operate the pantry.
Wow.
I just want to go back to something that I said earlier, because as I'm listening to everyone speak, maybe to reframe something that I said, what I was really trying to say is that I just wanted to manage and be upfront about the sophistication of our program, our non-cash program, I guess is what I was reacting to. But at Starfish, we have about a $13 million budget, and probably $1.5 million of that at a minimum is in non-cash. We have to come up with that because of some large federal grants that we have. And one of the ways that we think about what we do with our in-kind gifts is it's really a great entry point to the agency, if it's marketing, if it's PR, if it's trying to convert someone to become ultimately a cash donor, which is really our priority right now. So we use this as a safe, it's a very safe thing to say, hey, we're serving all of these precious, vulnerable babies that mothers can't afford diapers, and if you could make a donation of diapers, it connects them to our mission, and it's a safe way to get them involved. It's not threatening to anybody. Everyone's got something around the house that they can contribute. So we think about it that way in a strategic way, but the infrastructure to support the program, even in an agency that's $13 million, is very limited. So it's a lot of people trying to make the right decisions day in and day out and be focused in what we do, but we suffer from a lack of infrastructure to make it a lot more.
Well, I think that's an important lesson for all of us. You know, we can only do what we can do, and so capacity is a big issue. I think having policies around when you can say yes, when you can say no around non-cash gifts, very important, and that's a key lesson. Why don't we pause a minute now that everybody has kind of described their program and some issues, and open it up for questions from you, for them, or any other experiences you'd like to share now that you've heard their stories.
I have a question for the Macomb Center. Are you concerned about unrelated business income because you are getting donated things and selling it? And the IRS has been cracking down on 501c3s and trying to get many off the rolls that should not be on the rolls. If you're selling that much, are you looking at that, and you aware that that could have implications for your continued existence?
Yes and yes. We're fully prepared to pay taxes on unrelated business income.
For those who may not know, unrelated business income, there are three principles that qualify for unrelated business income. It's got to be a commercial activity. So even though a charity is doing it, the question is, are there other for-profit commercial enterprises doing a similar type of thing? So it's got to be a commercial activity. It's got to be regularly carried on. That's another requirement. And by regularly carried on, it could mean once a year, every year. It could be many times during a year. It could be every other year, whatever the activity is. But regularly carried on has to be part of the equation. And then finally, it's got to be unrelated. It's got to be an activity that's unrelated to your exempt mission or purpose. So while some activities may be commercial, there are for-profit ventures doing it, and it may be regularly carried on. You're doing it every year, every month, or whatever. But if the activity relates to your exempt purpose, it will not be unrelated business taxable income. And there are lots of examples of that. One I like to use a lot is a sheltered workshop for disabled adults who are assembling mailings or building pallets. There are for-profit companies doing that, but the training of disabled adults is the exempt purpose of that sheltered workshop, so that is not unrelated business taxable income, the revenue from that. So that's just an example. I just thought everybody would understand what UBTI is.
This might be two questions instead of one, but it seems to me like non-cash gifts, at least from all of your organizations, appear to be a very significant sum of money coming in. I'm wondering if any of your organizations have one person that is dedicated to soliciting in-kind or non-cash gifts, or if that responsibility falls upon the shoulders of everyone, and it's really a matter of someone calls you and says, oh, we have this, can we donate it?
So on our webpage, we have a wish list that says the things and the kinds of donations that we will accept. Like, we can't do clothing because we have absolutely no place to store clothing. And so if people want to donate clothing to us, they cannot. So we have someone who maintains the wish list on our webpage. And then each site is responsible for collecting the donations that address whatever the service is they're providing. So the food pantry, they're responsible for collecting their food, giving people a donor forms, telling them thank you, and doing the rest of our process. If it's blankets and sheets for the shelter, then the shelter staff takes those gifts. We make donor forms for them. And then our community relations department takes all of the donor forms, they write thank you letters, and then they give it to the data entry person, and they put the donor in the, so it's kind of divvied up based on the activity really across the organization. So everybody has some responsibility.
We do have staff dedicated to food donations, people that will go out and regularly meet with businesses in the community that may have surplus prepared and perishable foods to donate. Beyond that, though, we also look for a lot of other items that can be useful for us, and that's often opportunistic. For example, when we built our building 4.5 years ago now, we had a very lean budget, and in the middle of a capital campaign, it was very difficult for us to meet all of the financial needs of the organization for operations in addition to building the building. And as we put the plans in front of the city, one of the things that the city pointed out was very important to them was that they wanted really nice landscaping. Well, landscaping, especially really nice, expensive, beautiful landscaping, wasn't part of our budget for the building. And so over the years, we had been building a relationship with English Gardens, and so we reached out to the president, and that was something that was very readily, easily done by him. It was late in the season after most of his sales were done, and he had extra trees and shrubs that he could come in and install. And so that's an example of something that was opportunistic, and I think a lot of the items are. And sometimes through relationships, we also have things that just appear. While I'm on the topic of building the building, as I mentioned, we were pretty poor during that process, and I would go over once a week to see the process and see how the building was coming along. And I remember going over this one particular day to meet the contractor, and I walk up to the front door, and it is this big, beautiful, gorgeous, expensive glass door. I mean, it's huge. It's taking up probably a quarter of the size of the front of the building. And of course, I had a cow right there. And I'm like, Larry, where did this come from? We don't have money for this. And proceeded to tell him, take it out, get rid of it. We can't afford this. When he said, we had this on another construction site. We removed it from another building, and we knew you could really use it and that you didn't have the money for it. So I just brought it over and installed, surprise. So a lot of it is opportunistic, and it's having the relationships built and letting it be known far and wide what it is that you need and what an impact it would have on your overall operations and your ability to do your mission.
Do any of you try to convert your in-kind donors into monetary donors? And if so, how do you go about doing it?
One thing that we do that's a really easy way to at least initiate that activity that everybody could probably start doing right now is to just put a remittance envelope and thank you note when you're thanking somebody for a non-cash gift. So that's our quick and easy way to initiate the possibility. And our remittance envelope has an ask and explains our mission within it.
And I think along those lines, we just treat them like we treat a cash donor in terms of how we communicate with them, how we speak to them, how we acknowledge them in our annual reports, in donor recognition. So they're treated that way, and so same thing, they're getting remittance envelopes and so forth.
Have you had much luck in or experience with them, in addition to their non-cash gifts, making cash gifts to you, especially if it's, say, a company or business giving you the non-cash gifts? Does the individual owner of the company become a donor, personally?
We had a company that came and they did a renovation of our crisis center, and they also renovated our therapeutic daycare program. And the company just came and staff volunteered to paint and put down carpeting, and it was fascinating, really. But everybody, and the company has a mission around giving back and being active in the community. And then we had to thank all the people, who participated in all those renovations. And like my colleague said, you just treat them like regular givers. I mean, you send them thank you notes, you send them newsletters that have the gift envelope in them. You recognize them. I mean, one of the things that we also did was we invited 2 of their leadership to our annual fundraising event as our guest. So I think it's really about, like she said, it's about relationship building. People who give you non-cash gifts really are committed to your mission. sometimes in ways that people who give you money aren't, because they know more specifically what you need. So if somebody is donating food to you or giving you diapers for your babies, they understand the work that you're doing. So I think sometimes they're easier to convert to donors and more consistent donors than sometimes people who just always give you cash at the end of the year.
I think one of the biggest projects that we had in Monroe County was, as many of you are emergency shelter providers, you know a little bit about HARP, the Homeless Assistance Recovery Program. And in 2007 and 2008, Monroe County, and you guys are from much bigger communities, but we had hundreds of people moving into permanent housing. And when you have folks who are homeless, either living in the shelter, living in their cars, or coming from tents from our state park, they have literally nothing or very little. And so our Peace and Justice Committee for our Vicariate, which is a group of Catholic churches in our community, got together and they did a drive for household items. So this was a person who took it on, and she's a leader in our community, and she received just tons and tons of donations of household items, which was wonderful. But the flip side of that is that we also, you know, because of where the donations were coming from, we also got access to a lot of leaders in our community who then made cash donations. And through the cash donations, we were able to establish a housing trust fund, which is an endowment at our community foundation. And so every year, we draw the interest off of that endowment to help support our homeless initiatives into the future. So that was really our biggest project, where you had both non-cash that kind of translated ultimately into cash donations.
That's a good story. That's a great example.
Because we're asking for diapers and formula, which are very expensive items, we also remind people that if they give us cash or gift cards, that allows us to purchase these items even if they can't afford to buy a box of diapers or a can of formula. Which, Phil, I guess that gives me the question, is somebody gives us a gift card to Meijer, is that an in-kind or a cash gift?
My gut would say, I'm not sure there's a ruling, an IRS ruling on that issue per se. It's more a common sense application of what's out there. And I would say it's a cash gift, subject to 50% deduction.
It's very interesting that you all get in-kind gifts that you can't use. I know Forgotten Harvest because we were part of it, and I thank you so much for what you do, Susan. But I don't know about the other organizations. Are you like Susan, where you have partners that work up under you? And I need to know, Susan, that have you ever got a gift that you didn't need that you passed on to one of the partners that work under you, or one of the agencies that work with Forgotten Harvest?
We will often pass on gifts that we can't use, such as furniture or refrigeration, freezers, that sort of thing. But I did want to add one thing about how we work to leverage gifts, and we'll use one gift to leverage another. So this particular story starts with donors that were willing to donate large amounts of fresh foods, but the straight trucks that we had, which hauled about 10,000 pounds maximum, were not adequate to get the food. And the only way that they would release the food to us was if we had tractor-trailer capacity. And we needed it really quickly. One of our first things that we did was start reaching out to our board and some close donors. And the first call that we made was to our friends at PVS Chemical. And we asked them, could we please borrow was the key word, a tractor and 2 trailers, thinking that we had a little bit of money set aside and we could, pay to have them refrigerated for our uses. And the answer was, well, you can have a tractor for a while. It was not specified how long. But we couldn't use their trailers because they hauled sulfuric acid, and those wouldn't be good for the food that we hauled or the people that we feed. And so this particular tractor, the company had just bought another company up in Wisconsin, and this truck was going to be available in about 3 weeks. So that gave us a little bit of leverage because we had this donor with lots of food to give us, and we had a tractor coming in about 3 weeks. So our next call was to Kroger to tell them the story, say, we have the food, we have the tractor, could you please loan us 2 refrigerated trailers? Now these things are very expensive, so this is not a little ask. the answer was, well, we'll see what we can do for you. That was Wednesday afternoon. Friday morning at 6 a.m. when we start business, there were 2 refrigerated trailers parked in our lot. Well, this was really good news, but without a tractor, they weren't going anywhere. So now we had more leverage because we had 2 trailers sitting in the lot. And so our next call was to our friends at UPS. And we tell the same story, and their response is, well, we don't like loaning our equipment. We don't like other people driving our equipment for insurance purposes. So you're going to have to take a driver too. Well, that was just fine with us. In fact, that was great. And so for about 2 or 3 weeks, the UPS driver and UPS tractor hauled the Kroger trailers back and forth to the donor. Then the PVS Chemical truck came, and our driver hauled the Kroger trailers back and forth. Well, after that donor's season ended, we realized there was a lot more use for these trucks. And so we didn't exactly volunteer to give them back. And so this went on for several months, and December rolls around, and our friends at PVS Chemical call, and they say, you're not planning on giving our tractor back, are you? And I could tell by the tone of voice that it was okay, and I said, no, we're really not. And they said, all right, get it off our books by the end of the year. So we had a tractor. Well, spring rolls around, and we still got we've now painted PVS Chemical truck a pretty green and white, Forgotten Harvest green. And we're still hauling around the 2 Kroger trailers, and life is pretty good except for Kroger starts calling. And they are calling every week, and they're asking about their trailers. And, you know, summer's coming, and the harvest is coming, and the crops are coming in, and we really don't want to give back these trailers. But they don't exactly belong to us, and we figure all these calls are going to take them back. So we decide to call some more friends, and we call up our friends at Mercedes, which happens to own Freightliner, and ask them if they might have a refrigerated trailer, because we think now that we've had the Kroger trailers for so long that we're probably going to have to give them back. And the response in this wonderful thick German accent is, Susan, tell me, do you mind a repo? And I thought about that for a moment, and I said, you know, if we don't have to repo it, we're fine with that. Well, at that time in the economy, there were a lot of trucks out there, and companies weren't able to make the payments. And so many of this equipment was going back to the people who had made the loans on it. And so very quickly, we were the owner of a brand new, shiny, refrigerated trailer that we got in anticipation of Kroger taking back theirs. And within a few more weeks, Kroger called and said, you know, you've had our trailers for over a year. And we're like, yes, we know. And they said, we haven't used them, why don't you keep them? So the story continues on. We now have 3 tractors, 3 trailers, but it's a way to leverage gifts if you can tell the story, if you can tell about other heroes who've provided a piece of the puzzle that you need to solve the problem. And from what I find is people are incredibly generous if it's in their power to help you.
Do you share these stories in your newsletter, on your website? How do you tell others about these stories, or is it all kind of one-on-one discussion?
You know, our stories spread.
Okay.
We tell our stories in our newsletter. When we can get stories in the paper, we'll tell the story there. We do not do a tour of our building without telling our stories.
Okay.
And it's funny because sometimes people will come in on a tour that we don't know, and they'll say, oh, tell me the such and such story.
Yeah.
And so I think it's almost viral. These stories just spread and spread, and I think they create new stories because more people hear about the hero that was able to donate this, and they think about it, and they think about what they might have, and they step up too.
Yes. Good. Good. So you do have to tell your story, and don't be bashful about it. You have to, and that'll build. Any other questions?
I have a question for the panel. At SOS, because we interface we have so much interaction with our volunteers and our clients. Sometimes when we get in cash or non-cash gifts, the donor wants to specify a specific client that they want it to go to. And I saw a slide that we didn't get to.
Yes.
That you were going to address this issue, and I
Yes.
was wondering if you could provide some feedback if anybody else has any similar experiences.
Yes, let me show you the slide. That's a great question. We've been moving in a bit of a rush, and I think it's early on here. What's a charitable gift? And remember I said that they have to deliver control, but there also has to be an intent to make a gift, and that return benefit or quid pro quo is not part of the gift. So goods or services reduce the gift. No strings attached. A deduction is denied if a gift is a conduit for a specific person. The point here is the donor cannot identify who's going to benefit by the gift. Now you can, because many of you are serving people, people can benefit from the gifts that come to you. The point is you, the charity, is deciding who benefits from either non-cash or cash gifts when you make grants out. Are you with me? So when the gift is made, there can be no condition, certainly nothing in writing, binding you, the charity, to transfer any asset to a specific pre-identified person. Also, they can't add strings that, for example, inhibit your ability to dispose of the asset. They can't give it to you and say, now, you're never going to sell this, and you have to agree never to sell it. Or you're going to use this a specific way that maybe, is too much of a control. Now, we get that a lot with stock gifts. People give you stock and want you never to sell it, keep it invested, because they believe in it. But at the end of the day, the IRS expects you, the charity, to have absolute control over the asset. If you need to sell it, give it away, whatever, it's your prudent decision-making that has to drive that engine. And then the final one is there's no deduction if you don't comply with whatever they request, it goes back to them. Anything like that will not qualify the gift for a deduction. Does that help?
It does. I'm just curious if anybody on the panel or otherwise has had any similar experiences and how you would maybe address that with the donor.
Go to this definition of what a charitable gift is. And that definition is included in that 526 publication. In there, the IRS describes what a charitable gift is and goes through some of these things. So that doesn't always win the day with donors. Just because the IRS says it in a publication doesn't mean they either believe it or want to believe it. But there it is. You can go to the expense of having a lawyer write an opinion letter if it's that big a deal. But at the end of the day, you got to be careful about those kinds of, because again, if you get in a habit of that, the IRS can start auditing you and looking at you as complicit with inappropriate tax benefits or other inappropriate activities relative to gifts.
I was just going to comment that we actually get that quite a bit. My colleague was reminding me that we had someone come in just before Christmas and want to give a gift card to a family that evening for Christmas, which is very generous and wonderful for our survivors, but the problem is that we can't identify a specific family or survivor, and we also get those questions, we want to adopt a family, give us the specifics for our family. So we use language that we have to protect the anonymity of the folks that we're working with, and so we can't use those kinds of identifying markers. When you use the dignity and the anonymity of those that you serve, donors tend to be able to understand that better. And when we tell them that, the gifts or the goods that we receive are given to anybody who needs them at the time that they need them, and that we really can't identify a particular person to receive a particular service because it's not fair to the rest of the clients we serve, that seems to help, because we're not putting it on us refusing their gift, we're putting it on, in the best interest of all, and that seems to help a bit.
Other questions? Well, let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you.